All right, let's dive into another fascinating case. And like always, we pick stories that are really going to make you think. This one takes us to Mansfield, Ohio, back in 2015.
Mansfield, Ohio. All right.
Yeah. So picture this. We've got Patty Hudson.
Okay.
She's 62 years old, lived a pretty quiet life, loved her cats, kept to herself, not really someone you'd call a social butterfly.
Yeah.
But, some folks just value their privacy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But then one day, Patty just vanishes.
Vanishes. Okay.
And here's where it gets really strange.
Okay.
She's gone for 6 months before anyone even reports her missing.
6 months. You said that's a long way. You're absolutely right to focus on that gap, that 6 month period. In these cases, in missing person cases, time really is the enemy.
Yeah.
Every hour that goes by makes it so much harder to find someone alive and well. Statistically speaking, the odds of finding someone alive, they just plummet after the first 48 hours.
Yeah.
Let alone 6 months. So right off the bat, we've got a real puzzle on our hands.
Yeah, you have to wonder, right? Like, did nobody in her life notice she was gone? Was there some reason nobody raised the alarm? Because this case, as we unfold it, you'll see it is anything but straightforward.
Right.
We're talking about nosy neighbors, a chase that goes across the country, and even a confession that is so wild,
Wow.
it'll leave you speechless.
Yeah. Timelines are absolutely critical in investigations like this. Wouldn't you say they're like the foundation of the whole case?
Yeah.
Every detail, every little interaction, every sighting, it all has to be placed in order meticulously. And with a 6 month delay like this, well, that foundation is shaky at best.
Okay, so let's fast forward to December 2015.
Okay.
Patty's sister, she drops by with a Christmas gift.
Okay.
And that's when the alarm bells start going off. Mail's piled up, newspapers are everywhere, the TV's on inside. It's as if Patty just stepped out for a moment and never came back.
It's like a classic vanishing act.
Yeah.
That 6 month delay that really throws a wrench into things?
Right.
It makes you think, did someone want it to look like she had just chosen to leave? It makes you wonder.
Yeah, and as police start digging into this case, they uncover an interesting detail.
Okay.
A neighbor, actually the mailman, had asked for a wellness check on Patty months earlier.
Really?
He'd noticed the mailbox was overflowing, but nothing came of it at the time.
Oh, wow.
So it's a reminder that even the smallest observations can be important.
Right.
And a missed opportunity like this is so frustrating.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah.
It highlights how important everyday people are in these cases.
Yeah.
A tiny detail noticed by, a neighbor or the mail carrier, it could be the missing piece of the puzzle. It's a shame that initial check didn't turn up anything.
Yeah. So the police, they start asking around the neighborhood, hoping that someone has seen something, anything. And they find out that a couple who'd moved in next door to Patty just 6 weeks before she disappeared, they also vanished around the same time.
Oh, wow. So 2 disappearances.
Yeah.
Back to back, practically.
Yeah, from the same address. It seems a little too coincidental, don't you think?
The timing is certainly suspicious. While it's possible that it's just a crazy coincidence, investigators are always trained to look for connections.
Yeah.
2 disappearances so close in time and place. That's a big red flag that needs further investigation. Maybe their disappearance holds the key to what happened to Patty.
The neighbor across the street, he remembers the couple, Walter and a woman who went by Cara, and he remembers their blue van.
Okay, a blue van.
Detective Bill Bashan, who takes over the case, sees this as a potential lead and starts digging.
So what does he find?
Well, his search takes him all the way to Greenfield, Indiana.
Greenfield?
Turns out that same blue van had been stopped by police there a few months earlier. Seems our elusive couple is on the move, but the question is why?
A lead that crosses state lines like this can really change the game. It expands the whole investigation, brings in new witnesses, and maybe even new evidence, adds another layer of complexity. Seems like Walter and Cara weren't planning on staying in Mansfield for very long, and their movements could be directly tied to Patty's disappearance.
Right. But here's the real twist. The police in Indiana stopped that van because a woman had reported her mother being held against her will by a man in, you guessed it, a blue van.
Now things are getting interesting. This new information, it suggests that Cara might not be who she says she is.
Yeah.
And there could be a history of suspicious behavior here that we need to uncover. The plot thickens, and we're starting to see a pattern here.
Hold on tight, because the real identity of Cara is about to blow this case wide open.
The truth always has a way of coming out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And in this case, the truth is going to take a dark and very unexpected turn. You ready to dig deeper into this mystery?
I am.
Let's do it.
Welcome back. Last we left off, Detective Bichon was piecing together Walter and Cara's puzzling movements.
Oh,
Their trip had already taken them from Ohio to Indiana, but we still don't know why.
Right, right. So remember that woman who reported her mother being held against her will in a blue van?
Yeah.
Well, that report, that's what leads investigators to Kara's true identity, Linda Buckner. And Linda, as it turns out, was a fugitive wanted in Kentucky for financial crimes.
Oh, okay. So that explains the alias and all the moving around.
Yeah.
Linda was trying to stay hidden.
Exactly. A fugitive on the run, they often lead a chaotic and unpredictable life, always looking over their shoulder. It's a life built on deception. And it often means manipulating others to stay ahead of the law. And this is where Linda's daughter comes in.
Okay.
She becomes a source of information, really shedding light on what Walter and Linda were up to.
So Linda's daughter gets a pretty disturbing phone call from Walter
Okay.
around the 4th of July, 2015.
Okay.
And he tells her, just casually mentions, that he has a body in a bathtub and that he's going to bury it.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you imagine getting a call like that?
No, that's chilling.
It's absolutely bone-chilling.
And that phone call, it changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
It not only links Walter to a possible homicide,
Yeah.
but the timing matches up with Patty's disappearance, too. It's like a missing piece of the puzzle that suddenly falls into place, you know?
Yeah.
It gives investigators a look into the dark secret that Walter and Linda were hiding.
So with this new information, the police race back to Patty's house. They search the bathroom thoroughly,
Okay.
hoping to find something that backs up Walter's story. They tear the place apart, but they find nothing. No trace of a crime. Does that mean Walter was lying?
Well, it is possible.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about a confession that came through someone else. And Linda's daughter, she admits that her mother is a world-class liar. The source, how reliable they are, is always something to consider.
Mm-hmm.
But just because we don't have evidence doesn't necessarily mean a crime didn't happen. Walter and Linda had weeks, maybe months, to clean up after themselves.
Yeah, it's a twisted game of cat and mouse.
It is.
Detective Bichon, he believes something terrible happened to Patty. But proving it without physical evidence, it's a tough job. It shows how hard it can be, even when you have clues, to prove what they mean beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
That's where circumstantial evidence comes in, right?
Absolutely. In cases where you don't have things like DNA or eyewitnesses, investigators have to lean on circumstantial evidence. It's like a bunch of facts that when you put them all together, point to a specific conclusion. You could say it's like a web of connections.
Yeah.
They all point toward guilt, even without a smoking gun.
And in this case, Patty's debit card becomes a really important part of that web. Investigators uncover a trail of transactions all across the country, and guess whose card was being used at the same places and times?
Let me guess. Walter's.
You got it, Walter's.
Wow, that's a pretty strong link. It puts both Walter and Linda with Patty's card, which hints at foul play.
Right.
It shows a clear financial motive, and it paints a picture of this couple using Patty's small income to fund their life on the run.
Now, you might be thinking, how did investigators track all their movements so accurately? They basically became modern-day Sherlock Holmeses, using this giant map of the United States to chart every move the couple made.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
So they used a combination of license plate readers and debit card transactions to pinpoint where Walter and Linda were at different times.
Right.
License plate readers, you see those on highways and intersections. They take pictures of plates and store them in a database.
Oh, okay.
Investigators can use this database to see where a car has been over time.
Gotcha.
So when you combine that with the debit card records, they were able to create a detailed map of their journey across the country.
It's amazing how technology has changed criminal investigations. It's like having digital breadcrumbs leading right to the suspects. But just when they think they have a good handle on things, another curveball comes their way.
Okay.
A woman in Mississippi calls Detective Bichon with an incredible story.
What is it?
She claims Walter and Linda confessed to killing and dismembering their previous neighbor in Mansfield.
Oh.
She even had a machete and hatchet that they gave her, claiming they were souvenirs.
That's pretty disturbing. So a confession like that, especially to someone who wasn't involved, it carries a lot of weight. It shows that they're comfortable with what they did, and maybe even that they like to brag about it. But of course, investigators always have to back up confessions with evidence.
Yeah.
And that's where the machete and the hatchet come in. These tools, they can have forensic clues that link Walter and Linda directly to the crime.
So the scope of the investigation just exploded.
Yeah.
We've gone from a missing person in Ohio to A potential double homicide across multiple states. It's a whirlwind of twists and turns.
Yeah, this is when things get really tough for investigators. Now they're dealing with multiple crime scenes, potentially hundreds or even thousands of miles apart. It requires a lot of coordination between different jurisdictions, careful evidence collection, and a sharp eye to connect details that seem unrelated.
The police get warrants for Walter and Linda, and the U.S. Marshals, with their nationwide reach and experience in catching fugitives, they join the hunt.
Mhm.
It's a full-blown manhunt, and it ends with their capture at a state park in Tennessee.
So after months of searching, they finally have Walter and Linda. That's a big win. But it's not over yet. Now it's time for interrogation, like a mental chess game, to get the truth from two people who have proven they're good at lying.
Back in Ohio, Walter and Linda, they first deny any involvement in Patty's disappearance.
Oh.
But during that long drive back from Tennessee, something changes. They change their story.
That long drive back, often with the police, it can be intense. It's a time to think, to weigh your choices, and to realize the situation is getting serious. It's not unusual for people to break down and reveal their secrets during these drives.
So they claim Patty died of a heart attack, and they were just too scared to call the police because Linda was a fugitive. They panicked, dismembered Patty's body, and got rid of it to try to cover their tracks.
That's a very convenient story, isn't it?
Yeah.
It makes them seem less guilty by blaming the circumstances and their fear. But it also raises a lot of questions. Why cut up someone who died of natural causes?
Right.
Why not just report the death and let the authorities deal with it?
Exactly.
Their explanation seems full of holes.
Right, their story is full of holes. They claim they dismembered Patty and scattered her remains.
Okay.
And Walter even takes the police on this morbid tour, pointing out the places where he disposed of her body.
Wow. So it confirms they were involved in her death.
Mm.
But we still don't know for sure.
Right.
Did she really die of a heart attack, or is there something more going on?
Only about 20% of Patty's remains are found.
Oh.
Sadly, that's not enough to figure out how she died for sure. And that machete and hatchet from Mississippi, they don't have any DNA on them either. It's frustrating for the investigators. They suspect foul play, but they just can't get the hard proof they need.
Yeah, this shows how the lack of certain kinds of evidence can hold back a case. Without a whole body or DNA linking the weapons to the crime, it's really hard for prosecutors to prove murder.
But remember that heart medicine Patty was taking, Tenormin? Well, investigators discovered that Linda went to a hospital far from her home saying she'd lost her medication.
Now that's strange.
Yeah.
Why go through all that trouble to get medication?
Mm-hmm.
Was she really out, or was she trying to get a specific drug for a specific reason? Makes you wonder.
And here's where things take a really dark turn.
Okay.
Investigators find searches on Linda's computer about the side effects of a tenormin overdose.
Tenormin overdose, okay.
One of those side effects, death. And death by tenormin overdose can look a lot like a heart attack.
Wow, this discovery changes everything. Now their story about a heart attack doesn't sound like a panicked reaction anymore.
Right.
It sounds like a planned cover-up.
Mm-hmm.
Those internet searches, they suggest they thought about it beforehand, that they planned to make it look like a heart attack using a medication that's hard to detect.
It's chilling when you put it all together. The pieces of the puzzle are falling into place, and what we see is much more disturbing than we first thought.
Yeah, this is a classic example of how seemingly random details can come together to tell a story. It's medication, the internet searches, that confession to the woman in Mississippi. When you look at them together, they point to a carefully orchestrated plan. But the big question remains. Why?
Well, it seems the motive was pretty straightforward. Money, even if it wasn't a lot.
Okay.
Patty's income wasn't huge, but it was enough to support Walter and Linda's life on the run.
Exactly. And we can't forget that Linda was a fugitive.
Mm-hmm.
Taking over Patty's identity could have been a way for her to avoid getting caught for her own crimes.
Yeah.
It's a pretty calculated move, sacrificing one life to save another.
So Walter and Linda, they turn on each other. They both claim that they only went along with it because they were scared of the other. It's a classic tactic, trying to shift the blame and minimize their part in the crime.
Of course. Prosecutors see this all the time. They often use a defendant's own words against them. They highlight contradictions and inconsistencies to break down their made-up stories. It's a high-stakes game, and the truth is the ultimate prize.
Linda even takes the stand trying to convince the jury she's innocent. But instead of explaining what happened, she contradicts herself so many times that her testimony becomes this mess of lies. Even her own lawyer seems to give up, his defense basically being it was all her idea. But come on, can we really believe Linda did all of this by herself?
It's really hard to believe.
Hmm.
All the things they did, the way they got rid of the body, traveling across the country, getting that medication, it's just not likely that Linda did all of that without Walter's help.
Right.
They're trying to blame each other, which is predictable. But in the end, it's not convincing.
And the jury agrees. Walter and Linda are both found guilty and sentenced to prison. Justice is served. But that doesn't bring back Patty or ease the pain of her tragic and senseless death.
It's a harsh reminder that evil can hide in plain sight,
Yeah.
This case, with all its lies and manipulation and how little they cared about human life, it's a warning to all of us to be careful and watchful and to never underestimate how dark people can be.
It really brings up a disturbing question.
Yeah.
Remember all those debit card transactions, that trail of spending that led investigators across the country?
Right, that trail of spending. It shows a couple constantly moving, living off of someone else's money.
Mm-hmm.
But it also makes you think about something else, a scary possibility.
Yeah.
What if Patty wasn't their only victim?
What if there are other stories, other lives cut short during their trip across the country?
It's a scary thought, and it might be one we never get a clear answer to. But it makes it clear how important it is to stay vigilant,
Yeah.
to pay attention to the small things, to question things that don't seem right, and to trust your gut feeling when something feels off.
This case has been a wild ride, hasn't it? As we wrap up our deep dive, I think it's important to step back from all the details and really think about the human cost of this whole thing.
You're right, it's easy to get caught up in the investigation and the evidence and the legal stuff, but we can't forget about Patty Hudson, a woman whose life was taken from her.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that in the midst of all the shocking stuff and the court proceedings, we almost lose sight of the person who was hurt. What do we really even know about Patty as a person?
Well, from what we've learned, Patty was a private person. She was happy being on her own. She loved her cats. She wasn't someone who sought attention, but that doesn't make her life any less important.
Right.
She had her routines, her likes and dislikes, her own little things that made her happy, and those were stolen from her, taken away by two people, motivated by greed, and just a complete lack of empathy.
And that lack of empathy is what gets to me the most. They dismembered her body, scattered her remains, and then made up all those lies to cover up their awful crime.
Right.
It's like they just saw her as an obstacle in their way, something to get rid of, not a human being with feelings, dreams, a whole life.
Their actions definitely say a lot. They showed such disrespect to her remains. It's hard to understand. It's like they thought she was nothing more than a nuisance, not a person whose life they had taken.
Yeah. It's difficult to grasp how anyone could be so devoid of basic human decency. And yeah, the motive seemed to be money, but their cruelty goes beyond just wanting money.
Yeah.
It shows a darker side, a disconnect from the value of human life.
I agree. It wasn't just about the money. It was about having power and control.
Yeah.
When you think about the internet searches for the overdose, the way they planned it all out, how coldly they got rid of Patty's body, it shows they had thought about it and weren't afraid to take a life.
It's scary.
Yeah.
And don't forget that Linda was willing to use her own daughter as a part of their plan.
That says a lot about their morals, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They were willing to exploit a family connection to pull her daughter into their lies, all for their own benefit.
This case really shows the dark side of humanity. It reminds us that even in places that seem safe, evil can be hiding just beneath the surface.
Right.
It breaks down that feeling of safety we have and forces us to face the fact that none of us are truly safe from the bad things people can do.
Yeah. It really emphasizes the importance of being aware for ourselves and for the people around us. Checking in on our neighbors, especially those who live alone, noticing anything unusual, and reporting anything that seems off, those little things can make a huge difference.
You never know, a simple act of kindness or just paying attention could stop another tragedy like this from happening. We often don't realize how important our community is, how important it is to look out for each other. Our safety and well-being are all tied together.
Exactly. This case, as disturbing as it is, reminds us how important it is to be vigilant, to be compassionate, and to feel a sense of responsibility for each other in our communities.
We have to remember Patty Hudson not just as a victim, but as a reminder that people who live on the edges of society are vulnerable.
Yes.
We need to pay more attention to those around us, and we need to work together to prevent tragedies like this from happening again.
Well said. And as we finish this deep dive, let's remember that the monsters we're afraid of, they often look like ordinary people.
Right.
They live among us, hidden in plain sight, their darkness masked by a normal appearance. It's a scary thought, but it should push us to be more aware, more discerning, and more committed to building a culture of vigilance and compassion in our communities.
Let's all work toward a world where stories like Patty's are just a distant memory, a reminder of the lessons learned and the changes made to make sure everyone is safe and well.
Absolutely.